To talk about how we need to be positioned for purpose, please welcome Jared Knoll.
Good morning. For the science fiction aficionados amongst you, you would have realized that that was not Star Wars, but it was actually Star Trek. I used to be a fan of Star Trek. It's a secret shame that I'm afraid to admit, but I know many of you here probably have the same secret shame, I'm sure. It's a nice chilly morning in Dunedin this morning. I'm from Auckland largely, but I hope you don't hold that against me too much. My first visit to Dunedin was actually around about 10 years ago, and it was an interesting experience. I came down to see a friend of mine who was performing in Les Miserables at the time. And the place we stayed in, his flat, was a typical Dunedin student flat. One corner of it was subsiding. Interestingly, about 2 years after we visited it, it got demolished and it was rebuilt. But you would walk down the hallway, and as you walk down the hallway, you were kind of walking downhill and to the left a little bit. And in the far corner, the far left corner, down the hill, was the bathroom. And in the far corner of that bathroom was the shower. And the shower, because of the way the house was subsiding, was on an angle. And because the drain was in the middle of the shower tray, the water would never completely drain from the shower. And of course, Dunedin being Dunedin, we would get up in the morning and we would have to turn the shower on hot to defrost the puddle that would freeze over before we could jump into the shower, lest we freeze our feet. Anyway, it's great to be here. I have connections to Dunedin since then. My wife, Hannah, is from Dunedin originally. I got married down here 2.5 years ago. So it's a great city and I really enjoy it. And dare I say it, I like it more than Auckland. I want to tell you a little bit about myself this morning. I want to tell you a little bit about the story that I've had and the journey that I've gone on over the past, I guess, few years of my life. And just so as a preamble, you know, whenever you give your testimony, the story is often about the person who gives it. And I really want to emphasize the fact that when I give this story, the story is actually not about me, but the story is about what God is doing in me and what God is doing through me and with me. And so I kind of want to emphasize that because testimonial type messages is often, you know, it seems like it can be about the person, but I really want to emphasize that. Just so you know who I am, I was born in Ratahi, which is in the centre of the North Island by Mount Ruapehu. Lived there for a few years, moved to Auckland, lived there for a few years. Moved to Rotorua, lived there for a few years. Moved to Auckland again, lived there for a few more years. Back to Hawke's Bay, did my high schooling in Hawke's Bay. I grew up in a Christian home. My father was a Baptist minister, which was part responsible for the moving around. And up until, I guess, the age of 17, 18, my life was a fairly mundane life. You know, growing up in a Christian home, had nothing really spectacular to talk about testimonial-wise. I went to university at Auckland, and I guess at this point, this is one of those first parts of your life where you make a decision that helps determine where your life goes. And one of the things I really wanted to do was go to medical school. I had good grades at school. I was doing well. I had friends who were applying as well. Unfortunately, my English teacher thought otherwise. My bursary English mark was 49. Thanks to the wonders of scaling, I passed with 55% as my final mark. And essentially what it meant is my average was not good enough to get into medical school. So I defaulted to a Bachelor of Science, studied there for 3 years. And this leads me on, I guess, to the first part of what I'm going to speak about this morning. We're going to talk from Psalm 139. So verses 1 and 2. O Lord, you have searched me, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. If you're taking notes this morning, the first thing I'd like you to write down as point number 1 is God knows us. He has searched us and he knows us. I applied to med school straight out of school and I was unsuccessful. When I finished my Bachelor of Science, I applied for medical school again. What had happened in the intervening years is that I had been on a short-term mission trip to the Philippines for 3 weeks, and my eyes were opened. I saw the poverty that existed in this world, and it ignited in me a passion and a discontent that I could not sit with. And so for me, when I reapplied for medical school 3 years later, the purpose behind it was this time was rather than just because I could, and that's what my friends were doing, I was doing it because I thought, hey, I want to go into the developing world and I want to make a difference. So I applied to med school the second time, and I didn't get in. My backup plan was to apply for, I did a master's program in forensic science, which is pretty much like CSI, but less glamorous. And I specialized in DNA profiling. I'm like the guy who was the lab rat, in CSI, and you give him some samples and he spits back a DNA result in 5 minutes. Except in my case, it was 4 weeks. Just goes to show TV isn't always accurate. And so I did that, which was 2 years, and I worked for it, working at ESR in Auckland. And this was my career. This was the plan that my life was taking. I did a couple more short-term stints to the Philippines, just sort of keeping my passion going for the developing world. Halfway through my first year after I graduated, I was having quiet time one morning, just spending some time with God. And out of the blue, I just had this word from God telling me to apply for medical school. Now, at this point, I'd long since given up on the idea of going to med school. It was something I'd put in the past. It was sort of an attempt and failed again. But I couldn't ignore it, and it was kind of like this hope and dream that I'd had that it had been lost. So I made some inquiries, and it turned out that I was only 1 week out from the deadline for the application, so I put in my application. And the application led to an interview, and the interview led to an admission into medical school. So having completed 5 years of university for my master's, 1 year of full-time work, I went back to being a student again. As of this point, I've been out of school for 12 years, 10 of which have been at university, and a student loan to match it. I guarantee none of you have a student loan the size of mine in this audience. But that's okay. But here's the thing. The first time I applied for med school, I did it off my own volition. It was something that I just wanted to do. The second time was perhaps a little bit more godly. I was at least motivated to serve God in such a way that I might, it motivated me to apply. It was more noble, in my eyes at least. But it didn't work out. The third time had nothing to do with me. The third time was in a moment where I was somewhere else completely, and God called me into medical school. And so the difference between that is that I'd left myself behind on the third time. And that was when God picked up the call. God knew my heart, He knew my desire and my passion to serve in the developing world, to do it through medicine. And He didn't let it go. He knew me. God knows us. And between my second and third year of medical school, I went to the Philippines again, this time for 3 months on my summer break. I thought, if I'm going to do this mission thing, I need to see if I can do it for an extended period of time rather than 2 to 3 week stints. I went there and I did it, and it was great. Had an awesome time. Ministry involved largely speaking, kind of working in child orphanages, sort of providing clothes and food to sort of poor and malnourished kids. But you know what? I came away, I did this by myself, and I came back and I was really lonely. And when I got back from the Philippines, one of the things I just cried out to God was, I can do this. This is the calling you've put in my life, Father, but please don't let me do this alone. I think I need somebody in my life, a wife, hopefully, who has a similar passion, who can do this with me, because this is hard work to do it alone. Interestingly, I'd come to a place where for the first time in my life I was actually okay with being single. And so I said to God, I will do this however way you call me to do this, but please don't let me do it alone. 6 months later, I met Hannah, who at that time It was at a conference in Sydney. And of course, one thing led to another. And we connected initially over the fact that we were both passionate about serving the developing world. We were passionate about injustices, social injustices, about poverty, and about what we as followers of Christ have been called to do in these situations. We got married in December 2007, just here in Dunedin, Maori Hill Presbyterian. And life was going swimmingly. This leads me to the second point. God knows our journey. Verses 2 and 3. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. He knows the journey that we're on. And it's critical that we understand the fact that God knows our journey, because each of our journeys is unique. And this is where life changed for me somewhat radically. 18 months ago, I was finishing my 5th year of medical school, just sat final year exams. We came down here to Dunedin for a pre-Christmas Christmas with Hannah's family. Because we were about to go overseas. We were about to travel for about 4 or 5 weeks and then spend 2 months in Zambia for my medical elective, working in a hospital in sort of the remote northwest corner of Zambia. I started to get stomach pains. They would come and they would go. I couldn't eat. I'd lost my appetite. I wasn't passing any bowel motions, but you probably didn't need to know that. It is important medically, though. The pains would come and go over a period of about every half hour, and they would last for 1 to 5 minutes. They started on the Sunday. On the Monday, they were still going. I still hadn't eaten. On the Tuesday, same thing. Tuesday, we flew back to Auckland, went to bed Tuesday night, woke up, started vomiting. At this point, certain alarm bells were starting to go off in my head. We went into the hospital. They managed me conservatively for a couple of days, which basically means admit and watch, whilst I was still in a lot of pain. By the time we hit Friday, my abdomen had swollen out to the size of a beach ball. I was in a lot of pain that moved me from paracetamol to the opiates, morphine and fentanyl. Not as good as some people would make them out to be. And they re-x-rayed my abdomen. And they had what on there was classic small bowel obstruction signs, is what they found. And there's a saying in medicine to never let the sun go down on a small bowel obstruction. So true to form, I was in an operating theatre within about 2 hours of the x-rays. At this point, the running diagnosis was a very unusual appendicitis that's presented in an unusual way that's given me a small bowel obstruction. Where I went into theatre. A normal appendectomy takes half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour if it's a little bit complicated. I was in theatre for 3.5 hours. I remember waking up, it was about 11:30 at night at this point, on the Friday night. And my wife was there, and I said to her, was it my appendix? And she said, no. And then I said, I don't know why I said this. Was it a tumour? And she goes, I don't want to tell you, I'll let the surgeons tell you. And I said, no, you tell me, please. And she goes, yeah, it was a tumour. The surgeons had gone into my abdomen, cut me open, taken out half my bowel. They found a tumour, they found some places that it had spread to. 6 days later, histology results came back, confirmed that it was a cancer. It was staged T3, N2, M1. Those numbers mean nothing to you guys, I realise. But what you need to know is that T3, N2, M1 could go as high as T4, N2, M1. I was already the highest rating on everything but the T scale. The surgeon who broke the news to us, we said to him, what are the odds of survival? He says the 5-year survival with chemotherapy, 40%. 40% of people with this are alive in 5 years' time. This is not easy news to take, obviously.